Indeed, we mark International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. In France, it's hoped that the Pelicot trial could be a catalyst for change. Well, we're joined on set now by Alexandra Lachowsky, a lawyer and in-house counsel and board member for the Women for Women France, an NGO dedicated to gender-based violence, notably looking out for migrant women here in France. Firstly, Alexandra, I have to ask you for your reaction to this Pelicot trial. We've seen that incredibly impressive Gisèle Pelicot, waving her anonymity, calling for a change, calling for the shame to be shifted. Do you think this is a landmark case here in France and we will see change?
I think that this case actually demonstrates one thing, is that we're still in a society that is dominated by male violence, misogyny, and that there's very little to no accountability, individual or collective. This case is a landmark case because not only of the number of defendants that we're seeing, it's also a case that is going to deconstruct the myths of what an abuser is. It's no longer the monster that's waiting for you in the parking lot. It's our brothers, our fathers, people that we love. It's people that come into our homes. And it's also a case that's that shows basically that the reactions of the defendants are astonishing as well. 35 of them are not pleading guilty. Some of them are challenging the fact that their sexual acts are qualified of rape under French law. And there's also a reaction of the general public, of men out there screaming, not all men. So it shows that we're still in this society that's very much dominated by this. And Gisèle Pelicot, by waiving her right to anonymity, is actually letting us see this through a magnifying lens. And I think that the fact that she's allowing us to go into the courtroom with us is going to spark it's going to spark conversation. It has sparked conversation, and it's going to spark some change, hopefully, within society.
It's definitely sparked conversations and debate, but let's look at this society reaction. And we saw protests across France again this weekend in support of Gisèle Pelicot and calling for the macho society to change. But there was, I know it was quite notably a one-sided protest, if I may. I believe you took part in them. Where were the men? Why are the men reacting the way they are here in France? Because they are still coming out defensive, even in the face of such a trial, are they not?
Absolutely. So I was there on Saturday, and there were 80,000 women and a few men. One notable difference is that there may have been a little more men than there were in September for the protests in support of Gisèle Pelicot. But the conversation is still very much a conversation that's happening within these groups of women trying to make a change. And let me tell you, we're tired. But we're not only tired, we're angry and we're unstoppable. And I think that this energy and this sense of togetherness that we did feel on Saturday during these protests, that is what is going to hopefully allow us to be persistent in that fight and to get to that paradigm shift that we need to get to. But we do need to involve more men, and we do need men to understand that this male violence is rooted in a system, and that anyone who doesn't help deconstruct that system is part of the problem. So we need them. We need them around the table for this conversation.
Now, you will work on the front line, if you like, of seeing this gender-based violence in France. Do you think France is a more macho society than other countries? Is the problem here worse than elsewhere?
What I think is that the numbers are staggering in France. We have 271,000 registered cases of domestic abuse. There are 1,012 feminicides since Macron's first mandate. Every 2 minutes and 30 seconds, there's an attempted rape or a rape in France. That's enormous. And these numbers are only increasing annually. So I think that based on these statistics, we are ranking pretty low in comparison to our European counterparts.
And do you think, the fact that they're at least being reported, is that a sign that there's support for victims in France?
That they're at least being supported.
Like, our case is taken seriously. If somebody has that strength to report a sexual crime against them, an attack, how are they received, if you like, by authorities in France?
I think that that's part of the that's a huge part of the problem, is the way that they are received by police officers that are the first to register the claim, and the way that they're also treated by our judicial system as a whole. The Gisèle Pelicot case has not only showed what the male violence and the male dominance within society, it's also shown the way that these victims are treated in our judicial system, with defense attorneys that are using victim-blaming tactics. Not only them, also the tribunal, who was asking some questions that are very close to victim-blaming tactics. And we've also heard very disturbing arguments coming from the defense that her husband's consent may have induced her own consent. So actually all these arguments of rape culture are used by the judicial system. And it's not just in the courtroom, it starts also at the police station. So there is a big lack of support from the system as a whole for victims to come forth.
Yeah, it makes it so increasingly hard, because this Pelicot case, I mean, they've literally got video evidence. You kind of think with that amount of evidence, it's quite astounding to me to see how much she was questioned and her consent called into question. Overall, I mean, are people successful when they bring their attackers to court here in France?
No. Overall, they're not. 6% of rape cases are brought, are filed as a complaint. 6%.
And are recorded as official?
Are recorded as official complaints. 74% are not prosecuted. 1% result in a conviction. So the short answer is no.
And how is that justified? On a lack of evidence, or how do they?
I think it's justified on a lack of training. For first off, lack of training of the police and of prosecutors that are prosecuting these cases. I think that we need to really ensure that we're providing specified training to the people that are supposed to support and who are the frontliners for these victims of gender-based violence. We need to put the budget into training, not only about sexual violences, but we also need to think about unconscious bias training, because every victim it's a very hard journey to get to file a complaint and to actually get to court. But we need to understand that some victims are facing intersections, and they're in a worse position than other victims to be able to express themselves in a language that they understand and that they speak, and to be felt as legitimate. There a lot of the time, foreign-born women are not believed. We've had a crazy case, a recent case, where a foreign-born woman who was undocumented filed a complaint, and the judge considered that she filed this complaint in order to get her papers. A few days later, this woman was found killed. So we're in a situation where we need to ensure that we're taking into consideration every single victim, and that we're providing the right training to these frontliners.
Because even you would imagine an undocumented person, it's particularly brave to bring forward a claim, because Absolutely. You're already in that vulnerable position of, could it be taken against you, and you're seen as, what are you doing in our country in the first place? Absolutely.
These victims don't go to the police because they're scared that instead of finding a place of safety and instead of going and finding help, that they'll actually receive a request to leave the territory.
And finally, are the police or those on the front line, are they open to that change in tone, to education on that level?
I hope so. I hope so. I think that the initiative needs to come from maybe our politicians. We do need them to take that decision to have these specific trainings Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully, as you say, this Pelicot trial, if nothing else, it has brought it all very much into the spotlight, and we can start to address it. Alexandra Lachowsky, thanks so much for coming in on this International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women.